Hey guys, welcome back to another video, and video number 7 in my series Astrophotography Target Tips. I'm going to be starting this video obviously outside, and this is a special video. I know I always say that, but this time I really do mean it. It's special for two reasons. First of all, the target that I'm shooting tonight, M16, the Eagle Nebula. I'll explain in a minute why that's special. And also I'm using some new equipment. I've actually had it for months, but sort of held back from using it just to sort of, get a handle with a DSLR first, and then start putting into, rotation some of this slightly more complicated, computer-driven equipment, but we'll talk about that in a second. So first of all, let's talk about M16, the Eagle Nebula. Now, you may have never heard of that before, but there's a certain region of this nebula that you've most definitely heard of or seen a picture of, and that is the Pillars of Creation. Here's a picture of it here. This is a famous picture that the Hubble telescope took. I'm not sure when. I'll put the date here as well. But it took it, and it's probably the most well-known picture it's ever taken, just because of the sheer beauty and the details it would capture on this interior region of the Eagle Nebula. And I'm hoping to be able to capture some of that detail as well. Obviously it's not going to look anything like that, but you will be able to see the pillars in my picture, and you can in many pictures of guys that take pictures from their backyard, or in this case front yard. So yeah, it's a target I wanted to shoot for quite some time, and for me to shoot the southern sky, which is where it's located, it has to be the perfect conditions. It has to be no moon, which the moon is already set basically, and very low wind, because I don't have the protection of the house to sort of shield the star tracker and telescope from the wind. And tonight it's pretty much a perfect night. So that's the first reason. As I mentioned, the second reason it's special is because I'm using some new equipment that I already talked a little bit about, and that is primarily an astrophotography dedicated camera, so not my DSLR this time. And also I'm using the ASI Air to control it, and we'll talk more in detail about that. But basically, when it comes to using a dedicated astrophotography camera, there's no screen on it. In fact, there's not even a power button. There's no buttons at all. Everything is run through a computer, either a laptop or, like I mentioned, the ASI Air, which is basically a Raspberry Pi based computer. A little tiny box. I'll show it to you in a second. But this is basically going to control everything that I need. The exposures, the image session. Basically, instead of an intervalometer, the ASI Air will be doing that. In addition, I also use it to do my polar line. Instead of just using the polar scope in the Star Adventure, the ASI Air will actually do a super accurate polar alignment, which gives you better stars and more accurate exposures, sort of just very crisp and everything looking nice and round. So it takes some getting used to, but tonight I was able to do it a lot quicker already, so I'm already getting the hang of it. So that's another big advantage. But the main thing is it runs the astrophotography camera, and that's a big thing, because astrophotography camera obviously is made just for simply astrophotography. So not only is it have a nice sensitive sensors, so you're going to pick up a lot of light, but in my case I'm using the ASI 294 MC Pro. It's a cooled camera, so that means no thermal noise. I can actually set the temperature, and there's a little fan on the back that will keep it at that temperature, so I don't have to worry at all about your sensor heating up and getting thermal noise. And as we've talked about before, noise is always a problem and something you want to avoid. Let me just try and show you real quickly here. Here's the camera itself. You can see it's basically just a cylinder, no screen on it or anything. You can actually feel cool air here because there's a fan on the back, and that's separately powered, and that's cooling the sensor, keeping it at minus 10 degrees. Now there's my Sharp Star 76mm, and riding on top of it is the ASI Air. And this is basically that Raspberry Pi box, little computer that's controlling not only the exposures, so in other words the camera, but it's also helping polar align. It's able to plate solve. It's able to do like literally a million things. It's unbelievably powerful for the price and the size. But that's basically the key to it all. Now with this equipment obviously comes a lot more need for power. So basically there's a cord coming from the ASI air to the camera, and then from the camera we have some more power. We have my Celestron power tank and also my Crisdonia battery pack. So this is powering the fan on the camera, and this is powering the ASI air itself. And then, as I usually do, I have my USB power pack powering the mount, the star tracker, and as well my dew heater. So that's basically a quick overview of the setup. It's a lot more complicated than my normal setup, but I would still consider it fairly simple. You know, we're not using a dedicated mount or an astrophotography mount. We're using still the star tracker and all that, so all that's the same. We're basically just swapping out the camera, which involves using, as I mentioned, either a laptop or the ASI air. And just quickly, I want to show you, here's a single 30-second exposure of the Eagle Nebula. It looks blown out on the camera, but it's not when you look at it with your own eyes, and you probably can't see it, but there's the pillars of creation. So you can already see them just in a 30-second exposure. So you can imagine what it will look like once we stack up, you know, a few hours worth. And here you see my tablet. So basically everything on the ASI air is run through your tablet. So you're going to look at your exposures on your tablet. Basically you can see some of the controls here. We'll go through this in another video. But setting your exposure length and, you know, all that, all your histogram, everything's here, but it's all on your tablet, and it's running wirelessly connected to the ASI air. So yeah, there's a quick overview. We're going to talk a lot more about all this, and of course the target M16, the Eagle Nebula, but I just wanted to start this video outside to show you all that. So let's move inside and we'll talk about the target itself, where it's located, framing it up, integration time, and of course processing. I'll see you inside. Welcome inside, guys. Just a quick story on shooting outside there. The first take of that outdoor portion was going along well. I was just getting to the end and I kept hearing a noise getting closer and closer. Finally I had to turn around and look, and sure enough there was a skunk like 4 feet away from me, and it was just getting closer and closer. So I actually had to bail on that one. But yeah, the adventures of shooting outside in an urban setting like we get. I see that skunk almost every night that I'm out. So yeah, that was a close call, but just thought I'd share that story with you. So let's talk a little bit more about the Eagle Nebula M16. So it's a big, bright, beautiful target. It's in the constellation Serpens. Serpens is kind of a unique constellation. It actually is on both sides of Ophiuchus. So I don't know if I'm saying that right. I'm sure I'm butchering it. But Ophiuchus, which we talked before, is similar, close to where Rho is. And Serpens is on both sides of it. It's kind of unique. Now, I'm not actually able to see Serpens with my naked eye in my skies, my borderline skies. At least I don't think I can. I've looked pretty hard and I don't really see any of the stars. There's not any really super bright, obvious ones if you're in a lot of light pollution. But we are going to use Ophiuchus to help find and locate the Eagle Nebula. It's a little bit tricky, but let me try to walk you through it and hopefully I can explain it somewhat clearly. So basically, in order to find the Eagle Nebula, what I do is I look for Vega. Okay, we've talked about Vega many times before, which is above Cygnus. It's the brightest star in the summer sky. So you should be able to find Vega in the eastern, southeastern sky, depending what time of night it is. And then basically I just look over to the right, sort of half a head turn, and you'll see two fairly distinct stars. If it's earlier in the night, they sort of go up and down, north-south. And so once you look over and you find those two stars, I'll provide the names on the pictures. I don't remember what they are, and I'm sure I'll butcher them anyway. If you sort of draw a line through them and go straight down, about, I would say, double or triple the distance of those two stars down is a third star. And that third star is what we're going to use. It's the closest one that I could find to the Eagle Nebula. So you always want to try to find a star as close as possible. That sort of gives you, each night that you look, once you find that star, you're able to know, okay, here's where I need to point my telescope.
So from that third star, you're going to go down and to the left. Now, it's a significant ways down, but not crazy. I would say at least the distance of those top two stars, and probably even closer to double that. That's how far down, and then slightly to the left you want to go. Now, the good thing is, basically the southern sky for me is, I can see almost all of Ophiuchus. It's quite a big constellation, but other than that, man, it's pretty. And of course, I can see Scorpius. We talked about that in my row video. But underneath there, there's really nothing at all. So that third star is so crucial. It's very dim. You have to sort of really look for it if you're in heavy light pollution. But once you find it, down and to the left. And the good thing is there's two other targets above and below M16. So the nice thing is you may not get right onto M16 the first time, but more than likely you're going to hit one of the two. So the one above it is called NGC 6604. I believe that actually refers to the star cluster, but there's all kinds of red nebulosity all around it, and it's fairly bright. It's the dimmest of the three, but even with the 30-second exposure, you're going to see it on the back of your camera more than likely. And the one below it is the Swan Nebula. That's a fairly well-known one. It's a little bit smaller than the Eagle, but it's very bright, and you'll definitely see it on a 30-second exposure. So what happened with me is I think I hit NGC 6604 the first time, and then I referenced on Stellarium, the app, and said, okay, I recognize that shape, and then I made adjustments to my telescope. I think I went the wrong way the first time. Oh no, I went too far down. That's what I did. So I went down. I knew the Eagle was below it. I went too far down, and I actually hit the Swan, and I recognized that shape according to Stellarium. So then I went back up, and then found the Eagle. It's very recognizable. It's very bright. I think it's magnitude 6, so that's important to mention. That's up there with North America and a lot of the other brighter emission nebula. So that's the nice thing. Once you do find it, you'll know you found it. You can see the distinct shape. It was actually upside down in the sky. The head was below but the body, so I flipped it from my final image, so keep that in mind. But yeah, you're bound to hit one of the three. So as long as you hit one of those three, it's a very gassy region, you'll be able to recognize it hopefully and then make adjustments, and then you can just sort of center it out, which we'll talk about in a second. But yeah, so Vega, look over to the right. There's two distinct stars that point down. Draw a line through them and then go a little way, quite a ways down, maybe, as I said, 2 or 3 times the distance of those two stars. You'll find a third star, and then it's down and to the left. And that's where that region is of those 3 emission nebula targets. So you're bound to find one, then you just simply frame it up. So for framing, all I do is just center the Eagle Nebula. Now, as I mentioned, I'm using my Sharp Star 76mm. You could definitely shoot this easily up to 100 millimeters, I think. You may even be able to go a little bit more. It just depends. If you want to get the entire Eagle Nebula, I probably wouldn't go much more than 100. 100 will give you more than enough focal length to be able to frame it up just right and have a little bit of room for multi-night imaging. If you want to go super close, of course, to the pillars, you can go crazy with it. And you're just shooting that inner portion. But, that's sort of a little bit of a different target altogether. But if you're shooting the entire Eagle, anything from, your Red Cat to, I would say 100 millimeters is definitely your comfort range. But my Sharp Star was more than enough focal length to frame it up. So I just put it in the center, and I had lots of room on my stacked image. I was able to crop it in and produce a nice centered image. So let's talk about integration time. First of all, here's a single exposure. Okay, I did briefly show you in the first part of this video, but here is, I believe, a 1-minute one. And as I said, it's upside down, but you can clearly see it. You can even see some surrounding gas. That has a lot to do with the new camera, but we'll talk about that shortly. And you can even see the pillars if you zoom in on that picture. So that's a nice thing. It's easily visible, especially if you're using a nice narrowband filter like the L Extreme that I was using. So integration time, it just depends. This is a great target because I think you really get what you put into it. So you can do 1 hour, and I've seen 1 hour images that were clearly visible, the entire nebula, and you could even see the pillars of creation very, faintly and not very crisp, but you could see them. Pretty amazing for an hour. And I've seen 20-hour plus images that are just incredible. Amazing detail, amazing surrounding gas. You can crop in on the pillars, no problem. So you really get what you put into it. But I would say, to be realistic, anywhere from 4 to 6 hours will get you a really nice image. I put 9 into this. That's at least usable data into my final image. I'm actually going to have 3 images for you at the end of this video. One starless, one with star reduction, and one super cropped in on the pillars just for fun. Even though I'm not using the proper focal length, but I thought I'd give it a go anyway. So integration time, yeah, I would say 4 to 6 hours will get you a nice one. If you're really limited on time, you're super new to this hobby, and you just want to shoot, an hour for you is a lot, go for it. It's still worth doing, if you have the right conditions and there's no moon in the area, go for it. And you'll be amazed. Just to see those pillars of creation is pretty special. This is a really special target, and it's quickly jumped to one of my favorites. So I was really excited to see that first, exposure, and then to know I'd be putting in at least 6 to 9 hours and to see the final product. So yeah, that's what I would say for integration time. Sync as much as you can. Here's my stacked image. This is again 9 hours. You can see it's a little bit, it just shows you how bright it is. That bright core is slightly visible, which is not normally the case as I've talked about so many times with stacked images. They're normally very dark. You can actually see a little bit of that bright core, and that actually reminded me a little bit of Orion. It's not as bright as Orion. I think Orion's at +4 magnitude, but they both have very bright cores, and that produces a bit of a challenge for processing, which we'll talk about next. So once you've stacked up your image and you've done your initial curve stretch so you can clearly see the nebula, the target itself, I suggest doing an initial crop. And then what I did was, because I found that after about 4 or 5 times stretching, that core where the pillars of creation are, it just blew out right away. So that was a bit tricky. Like I said, reminded me a lot of Orion. So after I think I stretched 2 or 3 times, and of course doing levels adjustments in between, I actually lassoed off the center part, the entire core of the Eagle Nebula, and then I went to select in Photoshop, and I selected the inverse. So basically, whatever you lasso, it's protecting that and working on everything else in the picture. And so then I did just a couple more subtle stretches, nothing crazy, because you don't want to make it too obvious, because that's being totally protected. So the tone changes, not only the brightness, the tone changes. So you got to be very careful when you select only the inverse, and make sure that you're feathering. That's up at the top of Photoshop, to feather. You don't want it to be a hard line that you lasso off. You want it to feather out. And yeah, so I did a couple more stretches and levels adjustments, and that sort of just brought out the surrounding nebulosity nicely. After that, I basically, did some camera raw filter, obviously main editing. The one thing is I will say we got to talk about is with the Astro dedicated camera. Normally with my DSLR, I am struggling to get that nebulosity smooth, like in these ones here where it just looks like a soft gas. I always have to play with luminance in the camera raw filter to sort of smooth that out, and then from there try to still bring out some of those details back without getting that grain back, that noise. But with the cooled camera, what a difference. I know I sunk 9 hours, and that definitely helped as well. So much less noise, it's crazy. You can zoom in, you can crop, and it just looks good. So already I'm seeing the benefits. It's also, I think, a bit more of a sensitive chip in that camera, but the cooling is the main thing, and boy, what a difference already. I'm definitely sold. As I mentioned, I'm not throwing my DSLR out. In fact, I still want to buy a full frame. I'll talk about that in another video, but yeah, it definitely makes a difference. So if you have a DSLR, you're going to want to sink a little bit more time into it. That will definitely help with getting that emission nebula smooth, but it's really no different than any of these other, targets. Graininess is a challenge with the DSLR, and so you have to work with luminance. You'll have to work to smooth that out, and then lasso off the areas that you do want to bring that detail back, so that you're not bringing the graininess back when you're trying to just bring out subtle details in the rest of the picture. And that's one thing I want to mention too. Once at the very end, there's a lot of, even inside and around the pillars of creation, there's all these sort of plumes of gas that have nice detail. And there's actually some nice dark nebula at the very top below the head of the eagle. And so I wanted to bring that out. So I lassoed off some of those areas and just increased contrast and texture, clarity, all those sliders in the camera raw filter to sort of bring them out. And then I just sort of unselected everything with the whole image and just sort of trying to make sure it had a nice even look. And that's basically it. I mean, there's really, outside of protecting the core, which is a challenge, not as bad as Orion, but still a challenge, it's basically a standard emission nebula. There's nothing that challenging about it, and that's why I say this is a great target for beginner to crazy advanced. There's a little bit in there. It's like Orion. There's a little bit in there for everything. Easy to capture, hard to really master and get like a really beautiful detailed picture where all elements of it look really nice. That's the challenge. So this is the kind of target that you can shoot over and over, and you'll hopefully make improvements or focus on something different in it and get something new. So yeah, that's what I would say for processing. It's pretty standard, but just try to you'll probably have to lasso off that center part, protect it, and then stretch the rest of it a little bit more, just because there's so much surrounding gas. You want to pull out as much of that as you can. And that brings me to the next sort of little portion of this, which is doing a starless image. I've already talked about that before. Here's the video on my Eagle Nebula, the first time that I did a starless image, and here's the video on how to use that program, StarNet++, to make a starless image. Super easy. If you haven't watched that video, check it out. It's not too long. I show you exactly how to do it. It's really easy, and this to me is probably the perfect target for it. I've seen many pictures of it starless, and I really liked it. I like my star version as well, don't get me wrong. It's a different look. But there's so much detail in this particular target, the gas and the surrounding gas. When you remove those stars, you really see the details of it. And I even removed them for my shot of the pillars of creation, my super heavy crop that I did. You'll see at the end of this video. I know that may seem funny to some. It is a star forming region, and here I am removing the stars. But you know, when you're using a star tracker that doesn't track all that well, it's hard to do a heavy crop because you start to see, you know, the stars are definitely not perfectly oval. They're round. They're more oval. So I just removed them and tried to go for like a sort of an artsy look on my pillars picture. It was just for fun. One day I'm definitely going to shoot that with a big time focal length telescope and see what I can get from it. But yeah, if you're going to do a starless, obviously you're going to use StarNet++, and I think it's worth trying. Why not? And if you're going to do a heavy crop of the pillar, say you are able to shoot this with like 100 millimeters even, that would really help, or even higher. You know, why not? Do your initial stretch, get a clear shot of where the target is, and then do a heavy crop, and then start processing it. I always do my heavy crop separately. That's just me, but I find it works better. And I use, when I'm doing my heavy crops, same with my image you'll see at the end here, I use my camera shake reduction in the sharpen menu of Photoshop. Just sort of circled that one area of the pillars itself, and it just sharpened it up nice. And then I used, again, the lasso, and I used camera raw filter and just made some final tweaks to it to get it as sharp as I could, and to sort of try to bring out some of the brightness from behind. I almost like it to look like it's being illuminated from above, you know, like a really majestic looking picture, and that's what I tried to do. It's not amazing, my cropped image, but it was fun trying anyway. And it's always amazing to see the pillars of creation, only because, as I mentioned, everyone knows it. It's such a famous picture, and to be able to shoot that yourself, you know, it's a nice feeling from your very own backyard. But yeah, other than that, guys, it's not that hard. Like I said, easy to capture, hard to master. That's how I would sort of best describe this particular target. So if you've never shot it before, or you're just starting this hobby, give it a go. Wait till you got great conditions, then there's no moon, and you got a clear shot of the south, and give it a go. And sink as much time into it as you can. You'll definitely get your time's worth with this particular target. So I hope that helped. I hope that this helps you if you've never shot it before in particular. I think, again, the hardest part is going to be finding it if you're a beginner. But once you find that area, you'll be able to make the necessary adjustments, as small as they may be, and get it centered up nicely. And then sink as much time into it as you can. I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. I got another one coming soon, just talking about my first year in astrophotography, sort of my look back on it, some of my before and after images in this year, and what's next, and a lot will have to do with that Astro dedicated camera. I'm looking forward to using that more, making a video about that as well, and of course my mount, if it ever comes. That's on back order, hopefully soon. That's going to open up many doors for some new equipment as well. So I look forward to sharing that video with you as well. But without further ado, here are my 3 images of M16, the Eagle Nebula. Thank you guys so much for your support. I really appreciate it. And I will see you on the next one. Take care.